What's up? This is the Geeky American Otaku, and it's officially spring, so that means it's time for my newest video, and today it is a new edition of the Top 10. This edition of the Top 10 is going to be a bit different. In fact, it's actually going to have more than 10 items on the list. Technically, this should be called the Top 15, because today the subject is the top 15 Game Boy and Game Boy Color games that need to be added to the Nintendo Switch Online. If you haven't heard by now, Nintendo is officially closing their eShop on both the Nintendo 3DS and Wii U effective tonight. Now, this is a huge dick move on Nintendo's part, mainly because a lot of games will probably end up being lost forever unless they are brought over to the Nintendo Switch's eShop, and sadly, it looks like Nintendo has said nothing about it. This will just end up leading to piracy. So, congratulations, Nintendo! Anyway, clearly they don't think this stuff through. Now, I should point out that the eShop is still active on my 3DS up here in Idaho, and it may still be active in your part of the world, and it may not. I think it's going to close down permanently at midnight. And anyway, Nintendo has started adding some Game Boy and Game Boy Color games to their Nintendo Switch Online service, and in this video I picked the top 15 games and or game series that will hopefully be added. I should point out that all but one of these are still available on the 3DS eShop until at least tonight. So if you haven't gotten them yet, and you still can, get out there and get them before it's too late. With that in mind, here's our list. Number 15, Mario's Picross. Released in 1995, Mario's Picross is a nonogram game where the player must have Mario chisel at a puzzle grid in accordance with numerical hints provided on the upper and left-hand edges of the grid in order to reveal a picture. Making a mistake will deduct time, and if you make too many mistakes, you'll run out of time and the game is over. Despite positive reviews, the game bombed outside of Japan, mainly because Americans don't like to think too much when we play video games. Anyway, it has gained a cult following, though. Number 14, Pokemon Puzzle Challenge. This 2000 game was based on Panel-de-Pon, which served as the basis for Tetris Attack, but with characters from Pokemon instead of Yoshi's Island, specifically the then-new Gold-Silver games. Player Pokemon included the Johto starters of Chikorita, Cyndaquil, and Totodile, along with Pikachu and Pichu, while opponents included the gym leaders and Elite Four from the Johto region. Defeating them would add their Pokemon to your team. This game actually got a positive reception, including a 10 out of 10 from the no longer existing Nintendo Power Magazine. I want it back! Number 13, Harvest Moon Trilogy. 3 games in the long-running Farm Sim series from Natsume were released on the Game Boy Color starting in 1998. The first was a remake of a Game Boy game from 1997 and saw sequels in 2000 and 2001. The plot of the games has you taking over a dilapidated farm and bring it back to life by growing crops, raising livestock, making friends with the townspeople, gathering materials, and falling in love with one of the eligible bachelors or bachelorettes and starting a family. Number 12, Super Mario Bros. Deluxe. A 1999 remake of the game that started it all, Super Mario Bros. Deluxe is the same 1985 classic with some new bells and whistles, and until the advent of things like the eShop, it was the only way to play this classic game on the go. In addition to the original Super Mario Bros., there was a new challenge mode where you had to collect the red coins and Yoshi eggs, and you could also face off with a friend in Versus mode. You could even play the infamous Lost Levels. The game also had a toy box with things such as a calendar and a fortune teller. Number 11, Mega Man, Dr. Wily's Revenge. The first of 5 Mega Man titles for the Game Boy, which will hopefully all arrive on the NSO, Dr. Wily's Revenge, released in 1991, had the Blue Bomber facing the evil Dr. Wily once again, along with his revived Robot Masters. After he beat 4 of them, Mega Man will face the remaining 4 Robot Masters in Dr. Wily's Fortress before facing the game's final boss, the Mega Man killer, Anchor. After defeating Anchor and obtaining the Mirror Buster from him, Mega Man will chase after Dr. Wily to destroy his final weapon. Despite mostly positive reception, Dr. Wily's Revenge was also criticized for being even more difficult than the NES games, which were among the hardest to begin with. Number 10, Xtreme Sports. Released in 2000 by WayForward, who later made Shantae, Xtreme Sports had Finn and Guppy compete in a tournament sponsored by the Xtreme Cola Company and take on over 200 NPCs on 25 different tracks in 5 different sports, such as street luge, skateboarding, inline skating, surfing, and skyboarding. The main antagonists are known as the Bonehead Gang, and the goal is for Finn or Guppy to unravel the mystery behind them and win the tournament as well. In fact, this game, which is basically a video game version of the old Nickelodeon cartoon Rocket Power, is actually getting a port on Nintendo Switch. Tubular! Number 9, Super Mario Land. One of the games that launched with the Game Boy back in 1989, the first Super Mario Land game was not as graphically beautiful as Super Mario Land 2, and even for Game Boy standards was somewhat primitive, but it was still a very fun platformer. In this game, Mario travels to Sarasa Land to rescue Princess Daisy in her first appearance from the evil spaceman Tatanka. That sounds like the name of an old WWE wrestler from the early 90s. His name was actually Tatanka. Anyway, while it features the traditional Mario platforming, 2 of the levels are Gradius-type shooters where Mario pilots a submarine or an airplane that fires projectiles at enemies and obstacles. But the game still has one of the best soundtracks in gaming. Number 8, Kid Icarus of Myths and Monsters. The 1991 sequel to the NES classic Kid Icarus of Myths and Monsters features Pit as he again traverses Angel Land. Angel Land's ruler, the goddess Palutena, has a nightmare, and her soothsayer predicts an invasion by the demon Orcos and his minions. She summons Pit to take part in training and retrieve the 3 sacred treasures from their guardians. After retrieving the treasures, Pit will travel to the Sky Palace to rescue Palutena from Orcos after he turns her to stone. The game plays similarly to the first game and is no less difficult, which is probably why it was 21 years before another game in the series got made. Number 7, Metal Gear Solid. Also known as Metal Gear Ghost Babel, this 2000 entry, which actually was not on the 3DS eShop, takes place 7 years after the original 1987 Metal Gear game and uses the 2D overhead format from the 1990 Metal Gear 2 and adds elements from the more recent Metal Gear Solid. As with previous games, the objective is to infiltrate the enemy stronghold while avoiding detection from guards or surveillance systems, and Snake can acquire numerous items and weapons to help him fulfill his mission. In this game, a new Metal Gear prototype is stolen by African guerrillas called the Gindra Liberation Front, or GLF, led by Augustine Eguabon. Solid Snake is partnered with Delta Force Sergeant Christine Jenner and will face members of Black Chamber, a special forces unit allied with the GLF, and he'll soon uncover a conspiracy involving the GLF and the US government. Number 6, Donkey Kong Land Trilogy. Following the success of Donkey Kong Country on the Super NES in 1995, Rare released a handheld companion of the game, with DK and Diddy Kong again having to reclaim Donkey Kong's banana hoard from King K. Rool. The game did not have as many levels as the NES game, but it had all the difficulty. And just as before, DK and Diddy would jump between platforms, stomp on enemies, swing on vines, and avoid obstacles. 2 more games were released, with the second featuring Diddy and Dixie, like in Donkey Kong Country 2, and the third with Dixie and Kitty, like in Donkey Kong Country 3. The games pushed the Game Boy to its graphical limits, as Rare used similar pre-rendered graphics and sprites as in the NES games. Number 5, Kirby's Pinball Land. Released in 1993, 1 year after the first Kirby game on the Game Boy, Pinball Land has 3 pinball tables where Kirby is the ball. That's it. But it works. The game has 3 pinball tables owned by a boss from the Kirby series, Wispy Woods, Krakos, and Poppy Brothers Sr. Defeating certain enemies earns bonus points and multipliers, which combine to provide a bonus at the end of each life, or at the end of each level. Anyway, players can also earn Maxim tomatoes, which help block the bottom floor drain for a short period. The goal is for Kirby to move on to the next floor to access each table's boss on the 3rd floor. Each floor has a gimmick that helps Kirby reach the next floor, such as characters that can throw Kirby upward or bring in a warp star. After defeating all 3 enemies, Kirby must face King Dedede, after which you can play through the tables again to earn more points. Number 4, Wario Land 1 and 2. While the third Wario Land game is currently available on the Nintendo Switch Online service, it's clear that the first two also need to be added. The first game, made in 1994, which was billed as a sequel to Super Mario Land 2, had Wario ejected from Mario's castle in that game, deciding he would just build a bigger and better castle than Mario's. Along the way, Wario can find helmets which grant him powers. The dragon helmet, for example, will let Wario breathe fire. The goal is to get as many coins as possible at the end after Wario defeats his new enemy, Femme Fatale, Captain Syrup. The second game, released in 1998, improves on the first with color graphics for the Game Boy Color, and has Wario getting his new treasure back from Captain Syrup. The second game's challenge comes mostly through impeding player progress by implementing physical obstacles, puzzle solving, paths blocked by coin or treasure locks, or forcing Wario to backtrack to previously visited areas. By finding hidden exits in some stages, the player can change the direction of the game's plot and uncover different endings, as well as find more treasure. Also in the second game, Wario has no life points and he can't die, and he can take advantage of certain enemy attacks to undergo transformations. For example, touching fire makes Wario run around and later become entirely engulfed in flames, which will allow him to defeat enemies on contact. Number 3, Donkey Kong. Released in 1994 and the first Game Boy title with enhanced features for the Super Game Boy, the remake of the 1981 arcade classic, which introduced Donkey Kong and Mario, has our favorite plumber rescuing his original lover, Pauline, from the Big Ape. The game has the original 4 levels from the arcade, but when it looks like it's all over, DK revives and runs off with Pauline again, and now Mario has to chase DK through an additional 97 levels. In these new levels, which take place across 9 different worlds, Mario must locate a key in each level to unlock a door elsewhere on the stage. Every 4th level is a battle level, in which the player must either try to reach Pauline, like in the original levels, or defeat Donkey Kong using his own barrels against him. Donkey Kong Jr. will also show up to hinder Mario's progress, probably as revenge for kidnapping his dad in that game. The last level has Mario battling a giant, mutated Donkey Kong. Overall, this was an improved version of an arcade classic. Number 2, Pokemon Gold, Silver, and Crystal. The second generation of Pokemon improved upon the first with 100 new Pokemon, better graphics, full color, a real-time clock, and the new Johto region. Gold and Silver had other new features that are now staples of the Pokemon franchise, such as having a Pokemon hold an item, notably berries, the addition of Dark and Steel types, Pokemon breeding, and for the first time, shiny Pokemon. All those shiny hunters have been doing that stuff for over the past 20 years. Anyway, after you beat the Elite Four in Johto, you can then head over to Kanto from the first games. It was like 2 adventures in 1. Pokemon Crystal, released in 2001, added the option to play as a female trainer for the first time ever, as well as introducing new features including a subplot involving the legendary Pokemon Suicune and the mysterious Unknown, as well as the Battle Tower, which allowed for Pokemon Stadium-like fights. These games was where Pokemon began to hit its stride. And number 1, Pokemon Red, Blue, and Yellow. Of course, no mention of Pokemon can be made without the games that started it all. First released stateside in 1998, Pokemon Red and Blue were among the hottest games that year and are now among the most successful of all time. Although the graphics are primitive and the Pokemon look kind of funny compared to the later games, the games still hold up and are a good way to see how far Pokemon has come in the 25 years since. The third game, Pokemon Yellow, improved the graphics somewhat and added elements from the anime, most notably by having Pikachu as your starter Pokemon, having him follow you around like you were Ash, having your rivals start with an Eevee, and when battling Team Rocket, you actually battle Jesse and James. Hey, they even call you a twerp when you beat them. Anyway, while the original Pokemon games could be considered primitive compared to the games that have come since, although at least they were complete, looking at you, Scarlet and Violet. Anyway, you can't underestimate how much of an impact they have had on the gaming industry and on our pop culture as a whole. The quest to be the very best like no one ever was and catch 'em all began here. And that is my list of the top 15 Game Boy and Game Boy Color games that need to be brought to the Nintendo Switch Online service. Now, if you can think of any other games you want to see Nintendo bring to the service, let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Until next time, I am the Geeky American Otaku. Keep calm and game on.